Welcome to the HITea with Grace podcast. This is Grace Vinton, and I'm thrilled to introduce you today to Susannah Fox, author of Rebel Health. Susannah, thanks for joining us.
So glad to be here. Thanks.
So thrilled to have you on. I just finished reading this book and I could not put it down. Literally in one sitting, I read the entire book. It took me many hours and it was incredible. And then I had to read it again. My husband couldn't believe it. So everybody get yourself a Rebel Health. So Susannah, tell us a little bit about your career journey and what inspired you to write Rebel Health.
I wrote Rebel Health to help people step into their power. I want people to step into their power, whether they are patients, caregivers, survivors, or healthcare leaders, investors, people who work in healthcare are not yet recognizing the potential for the patient-led revolution. And so I wrote this book not only to introduce these two groups together, this idea of the rebels of healthcare. These are the patient survivors and caregivers who are building the missing infrastructure of healthcare, creating incredible innovations, often at home or at the bedside. I wanted to introduce them to people who have access to mainstream sources of power, and to describe this work in a way that people can see themselves in a new way.
Mm-hmm. I know I felt that, having had my long patient journey that the listeners know about, and then coming to a realization, all of this lived experience expertise I now had as an MD, but really just a patient, but feeling like I knew so much about my condition and others in similar situations. So I'm so grateful you wrote this to help empower patients and caregivers to really have a say, and they are having a say more and more. So tell us a little about your career journey that was in advance of this Rebel Health. Like, what brought you here?
Oh, thanks. Yes. So I did not necessarily have a background in IT or healthcare. I studied anthropology, and my engineer dad, who had convinced both my brother and sister to be engineers, was a little taken aback that I chose social science. But I was a startup kid in the 90s. In 1994, I worked for the startup phase for Real Networks. I became really excited about the possibility of building websites and building tools that were going to flip the power structure in terms of, for example, at U.S. News and World Report, I helped start their website for that weekly magazine and created a tool for people to re-rank the U.S. News college rankings according to what's important to them. So right from the beginning of my career, I was really intrigued by how the internet and access to data and access to technology could change the conversation and could change a power structure. Then I became a researcher, and the first report that I wrote about healthcare and technology, I titled it "The Online Healthcare Revolution." This was back in the year 2000, and little did I know where things were going to go. That now, 24 years later, I'm still talking about the revolution. And I was really blessed to have a mentor. I've had many incredible mentors, but Tom Ferguson was a mentor who said, if you want to understand the future of healthcare and technology, you need to spend time with pioneering patients and survivors and caregivers. And so often that's people living with rare disease and life-changing diagnoses. And so I actually used my anthropology background and conducted fieldwork in those communities and immediately saw that a lot of people in the rare disease community are 10 years ahead of the rest of the industry in using technology. And it was based on 20 years of that research that I wrote Rebel Health.
Wow. Wow, so interesting. Such an interesting path that you led to this point. And I love that the online health revolution, now what it's become, it's pretty amazing. So in your book, you discuss the concept of Health Rebel Alliance. Can you elaborate on what that means and how we can become a part of it?
Absolutely. What I noticed in my fieldwork is that when someone gets a new diagnosis, when someone becomes a caregiver, when someone is faced with a health challenge, they can have many different reactions to that. There is a big group of people who actually are too exhausted. They're too stunned. They don't want to take action. And that's fine. They can call on someone else in their network, someone else in their family, someone else on their care team to take on a more powerful role. What I saw is that people's behavior fell into some patterns. And it was in looking back at all of my field notes that I discerned these 4 archetypes of the patient-led revolution. One of the most important archetypes, and the one that people think of most often when I start talking about peer-to-peer healthcare, are the networkers. And that's really where you see the Diabetes Rebel Alliance, or the Rare Disease Rebel Alliance, or the ALS Rebel Alliance. It's when people gather together to pool resources and to help each other. And that is at the basis of peer-to-peer healthcare. And what the internet has done is that it's allowed people all over the world, across time zones, across geography, to find each other and help each other. And one of the messages of the book is that you're not alone. If you have a new diagnosis, there are people who would love to help you if only they knew how to find you.
I love that. I love that concept. And it's so interesting because I've been kind of involved in this networker side of it, connecting people either through the podcast or through social media, helping people connect with folks to get a diagnosis or figure out treatments. And it's very fascinating to see how much of this lives online now and is also being kind of encouraged through podcasts. And I love that you mentioned that in the book, because it's what I've been kind of living in and seeing. And I'm like, I guess I'm a rebel. I didn't even realize I'm in this alliance, but I did know. You do know, because you can feel the difference and you can feel the change happening, especially when it impacts policies directly. It's pretty cool. So tell me about the other 3 archetypes. So you said networkers, and then tell me about the other 3.
Sure. So seekers are the people who are not getting answers. They may not yet have a diagnosis. They may have gone to see a clinician and not gotten the answers, or they've been given a treatment option that they don't understand, and nobody's really explaining it to them in a way that they need. Seekers go on the hunt for information. They do not give up. That really is at the core of the seeker archetype. Another archetype are solvers. Solvers attack problems. They are the types of people who, if they see something that isn't working, they take it apart and put it back together again, whether it's an assistive device, whether it's a medical device, or actually whether it's a system. A solver can be somebody who looks at a clinical trial and says, I could design this better. Or they look at something that's facing their community in terms of regulatory restrictions, and they say, you know what, I actually can hack this regulation. I'm going to create the opportunity for my community to move forward. That's a solver. The 4th group, so networkers are in between. The 4th group emerged in my interviews as I was writing the book, because so many patient-led teams talked about how they found a champion, how they found someone who had access to mainstream sources of power. Mm-hmm. And that champion was able to get those resources to a caregiver-led or survivor-led or patient-led team. Champions fast-track innovation. And By resources, it's pretty diverse to think about what a champion might have access to. Of course, funding comes to mind immediately. It could also be access to special materials or labs or manufacturing facilities. A journalist can be a champion by shining a spotlight and sharing attention with a patient-led team. And regulatory guidance is another aspect.
It's really interesting, the champion role, because they not always experience that patient caregiver side the way the true patient caregiver is experiencing it, right? And yet they are choosing to use that power to make an impact. You got to wonder, do you think that there are certain personality types that kind of are interweave throughout all of this? Or do you feel like it's more has to do with your experiences and just willing to make a difference?
It's a great question. I've thought about this, about whether there are personality types that are attracted to the different kinds of archetypes. And again, going back to the interviews that I did and the research that I've conducted, it was more likely that they faced a certain problem that they were trying to solve. And that's my message in the book as well, that you might naturally be a solver. Like you might naturally be somebody who can't help but take something apart, or you might naturally be a networker, someone who just can't help but form community and learn in community. But I was intrigued by people who recognized that a problem that they faced required a solver's mentality or skills, or required a seeker. And they either became that or they recruited them to the team. In terms of champions are people who recognize that the mission that they're on as a policymaker, as an investor, as a business leader, aligns with the mission of the rebels. And they take the opportunity to again share their resources and share their power, because I lovingly call them the suits. Sometimes champions wear suits, not always, but the rebels and the suits can have mission alignment, and that's when you can really scale patient-led innovation.
They all agree. They agree on the same mission and the same goal, and they want to use their talents to better the world for all. It's interesting. And it is interesting to think about the fact that, patients and caregivers can't control what's happening to them, right? And so in that sense, sometimes they're thrown into one of the roles without even thinking they'd ever be in that role, and am I going to take up the cause and change it for everyone? Or am I going to just try to survive in this moment? And it's hard because you can't really choose most of the time in that situation. That said, how do you envision patient-led research and innovation, shaping the future of healthcare, especially in terms of addressing gaps and, challenges within the current system? What do you hope that future to look like?
One of my goals for the book is to help people to see not only the powerful roles that patients and survivors and caregivers can play in changing healthcare for the better. I also wanted to create a new lens where people can see all the unmet need, all of the suffering that is going on outside the view of mainstream healthcare. And I want people to recognize that there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity, whether it's going to be led by philanthropy, whether it's going to be led by government, whether it's going to be led by business, to address all of the unmet needs.
I don't think people realize how controversial this is, because for many years, it's very much, we need to think about what's best for the physician. The physician knows what's best. Then it's collaborative care. And the physician needs to collaborate with the patient. And then we collaborate together. Patient-led, this is a new thing, and it's controversial, and people don't like it. It's very uncomfortable for people because patients they don't know enough. patients are weak. Caregivers are weak. Like they're in a weak position, right? And so this is actually really controversial. What are your thoughts on that? The fact that this is really saying something that's not being said. And people are also saying, yes, this needs to be said, but there's a big portion of people that are not comfortable with this.
Thank you for picking up on that, because this is a radical notion. And often people who are used to hearing words like patient engagement and patient-centered think that patient-led is the same, and it's not. So patient-centered was a good start. Patient-centered is the philosophy that instead of the clinician being at the center, that it should be the patient at the center, and that all of the decision-making and information should flow through the patient, and that they should have a say in their care and in their treatment options, et cetera. Patient-led is indeed much more radical. It says that patients should be at the table from the beginning when you are looking, for example, at a research project. And here's where I want to say, it can look radical, it can be uncomfortable, but again, look at the success of the patient-led teams that have been given the resources that they need to make a change. And again, when you think about the gaps that exist, clinical trials that don't reach recruitment levels that are needed. Well, if you design with patients and caregivers and survivors, you will be more likely to design a trial that is a decentralized trial, for example, or has endpoints that respond to what the community is interested in, and you will be able to recruit people to your clinical trial. So that is a business need that a patient-led team could help with. The same thing is true in device design. The same thing is true when you're thinking about value-based care. There are so many aspects of healthcare where patients can help if they are brought in early and not brought in as a token.
The token patient thing, I can tell you just from the years of experience I have in this patient advocacy thing, oh, let's just have this token patient. Let's just have this person. Most of the time, it's not diverse. It's people who are comfortable speaking on their condition. It's folks that, can speak the language. You know what I mean? There's so many things it's in that tokenism that is so messed up. But I think that a company that does a really great job is Savvy Cooperative in terms of finding really diverse patients. If you are looking to include the patient voice, really consider looking into Savvy Cooperative. They do a great job finding a patient based on your specialty, based on your what you're hoping to gain from the insights. And I just love the patient genius bars that they put on at conferences now, where people can come and speak to real live patients and caregivers in the specialty they're trying to reach and get the insights. And things like that are really making a huge impact. I'm wondering, what advice would you give to patients and caregivers who are finding themselves now navigating the complexity of illness outside of the traditional healthcare system? How can they effectively advocate for themselves and drive positive change? And how can they move from seeker to networker to champion? Like, are there ways that they can find themselves in different roles that utilize their skills and abilities?
I have a couple pieces of advice. One is to know that you are stepping into a 100-year-old tradition, at least in the United States, of radical health movements that start outside the mainstream, and very often, eventually, something that started on the fringe moves into the mainstream. And we actually see that in peer-to-peer healthcare. We see it in terms, for example, of mental health, in substance use disorder recovery, eating disorder recovery. We also see it in diabetes, that peer-to-peer healthcare, this notion that you connect with other patients for behavior change and support, that's now something that is mainstream that started on the fringe. So my first piece of advice is to know your history. Know your history as a patient or survivor or caregiver advocate. There are people who have done this work before that you can learn from. So that's my first piece of advice. The other piece of advice that I have is in looking across the landscape at patient-led teams that have been successful, they very often brought the skills that they had from their life prior to getting sick or prior to being diagnosed. They brought those skills to the situation that they found themselves in healthcare. So if they were an engineer in their prior life, they brought those skills to healthcare. If they were an artist, they brought the mindset and skills of an artist to healthcare. Don't leave the rest of your life behind. Bring your full humanity to the challenge, because you are going to need all of those skills to survive and thrive.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Another question, I have for you is, how can companies, pharma innovation, health tech innovation, and even business governments better support and leverage the power of patient-led initiatives to improve outcomes on a larger scale? What are some pieces of advice that you could give them about speaking with patients and really helping them understand what they're doing and gain insights from folks?
The most useful thing that a company or a government agency or any organization can do is first very clearly define the challenges that you face. What are the challenges that are the business imperatives for this, pick a period of time. And then think about if there was a way to incorporate insights and innovations from patients and survivors and caregivers. What are the problems that are the best match between what we could learn from essentially the customers for the product market fit? So that's the first thing to do. The second piece of advice that I have, a really interesting way to start that I've seen be very successful in both business settings as well as government settings, is to hold a prize competition where you create a problem set that, again, is very, very clearly defined, that is important, and you don't have the skill sets within your company or organization or government agency to fulfill that need. You can create an open public prize competition, start to get insights from all kinds of teams. And in that way, it's a way to build an intake valve for patient, survivor, and caregiver collaboration.
So interesting. Such a good idea. People don't really think outside the box like that sometimes. And it's great to hear that some organizations are, really fascinating. So your book covers like a wide range of health conditions, experiences. That's the point of it, right? It's patient-led, caregiver-led. There's a wide variety of experiences in there. Are there any particular stories or insights from that really resonated with you the most? And I know you've had so many and it's hard to choose, but what really impacted you and gave you an aha moment?
I hope you'll indulge me because I have two.
Yes, please tell us all.
So it is Rare Disease Month. Rare Disease Day is February 29th. It's on a non-leap year, it's February 28th. And the rare disease community welcomed me as a researcher. And it was doing field work with the National Organization of Rare Disorders communities that because of them, I coined the term peer-to-peer healthcare, because rare disease is so extreme. They are the pioneers building new civilizations on the frontier using every tool they can find. However, I will also say that the full stack of the Rebel Health Alliance is most visible in diabetes. So when someone is newly diagnosed with diabetes, I'm happy to say that it's now standard of care to recommend that people connect with peers. so that they are able, so that someone living with diabetes is able to connect with other people living with diabetes. And so that, for example, parents of children living with type 1 diabetes are able to connect, whether online or offline. This is standard of care now, and there's wonderful programs because of the community where the networkers are able to gather. What's also really wonderful is that there, unfortunately, are a lot of unsolved problems in diabetes. And so that's where seekers come into the picture. They go out on the hunt and they will not give up. And they are often burning with anger and frustration at what is happening to them, what is happening to their families. And they will go out and find other solutions and then bring them back, and the networkers will spread them. What I also love about the diabetes community is that when they were given some new devices in the 90s, that's when we started to see continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps, amazing innovations that were locked down. People did not have access to the data that was being generated by their own bodies. And the devices were separate. And so people were having to constantly do the math that's necessary to do the calculations. The other thing that I love is that parents were particularly frustrated because they would have to set alarms throughout the night, every 2 hours, and interrupt their sleep to go and check on their child's continuous glucose monitor screen, until a solver named John Kostick hacked into his son's CGM, freed the data, sent it to his Apple Watch, and then the networkers took over, shared it. Suddenly, all over the world, people were starting to do the same thing, free the data, send it to their Apple Watch. Dana Lewis and Ben West collaborated with Scott Librand to create to break down the insulin pump, create a DIY open source artificial pancreas. And the amazing thing is, this is where the champions come in. Champions in industry and the FDA, after some prodding and there was some regulatory hacking and solving by people like Anna McAllister and Amy Tenderick and Howard Look. But where we are now, 10 years into this, is that the industry and the government have mission alignment with the patients, survivors, and caregivers, so that everybody understands the data belongs to the patient. Patients have to have access to their data.
Oh, I just love that. I love that so much, because, it was such a hard path to get to that point, right? And to hear about how all of the different archetypes work together to make that dream a reality is super impactful, especially given how abundant diabetes is and all across the world, and how many people are impacted by that in diabetes and beyond.
Exactly.
So I would love now to dive into your personal life, and your kind of personal experiences of being a leader now in this space and an author. And, I'm wondering, what are some things that you do in your personal life to work your best and make a difference? You're making time, you have done a lot of writing and a lot of promoting at this point now. It's busy. What are things you do to keep on top of your game?
Gosh. So keying off of the diabetes parents who have to set alarms throughout the night, I think sleep is an incredible basis for health. Focusing on how you can get as much good quality sleep as possible. That's one of those basic things that people are starting to talk about, but I think that is a transformative aspect of health. I think investing in relationships is also really important, whether it's in a primary relationship or in relationships that you have with friends. That's been incredibly sustaining for me and a big part of my emotional well-being. I'll also say that as as I was approaching turning 50 a few years ago, I started working out with a personal trainer. I had done a lot of that kind of weight training in my 20s. I got back into it actually because of some conversations that I had with peers who are about 10 years older. And I started interviewing my peers who were very, very healthy in their 60s. And what they said is start now with a regular exercise routine, including weight training, because that turns out to be predictive of long-term vitality.
Wow. That's so you can actually like hit like a girl, which is pretty amazing. That's fantastic and really important for us to remember, keep sleep in mind, keep working out in mind. If you want to work your best and make a difference, you need to be healthy to do so. Burnout doesn't help anyone, especially not you. So to do your best work, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Do you have any advice for women in healthcare and health IT and inpatient advocacy that are looking to write a book? There's a lot of people who would love to become an author. What are some pieces of advice you would give to folks?
The only way to write a book is to sit down every chance you get. And this is maybe not, it's a little crude, but butt in seat, fingers on keyboard. Just write every day if you can, even if it's only for 15 minutes. The other thing to do if you are working and juggling lots of things, set a schedule, set aside time to invest in it. I will say there's lots of ways to contribute to the public conversation. It does not have to be a book. I was in a peer mentoring group, and I kept talking about writing a book, but not actually doing it. And so my peer mentor said, we're tired of you talking about this book. Why don't you write an article? Why don't you test your ideas with a target audience by writing an article? And so that's when I wrote a Harvard Business Review article about innovation, patient-led innovation. And I liked it so much that I said, okay, now I'm really going to work on the book. But if you're thinking about writing a book, just know that there's so many alternatives to writing a book. It's really hard to, it's frankly really, really hard work.
Well, thank you so much for doing it. We really appreciate you putting that wisdom out into the world. And it's a controversial thing. So we know you were kind of putting your reputation on the line too by doing it. So I really appreciate you taking that step and doing that for the industry.
And can I just say on that point, it's really not about me or my reputation. Mm-hmm. I have been so privileged to spend the last 20 years collecting stories, having people trust me with their stories, that I feel a responsibility to share what I've learned.
Now, to finish this conversation off right, where can our listeners find you online?
SusannahFox.com, SUSANNAHFOX.com. I'm also on pretty much all the platforms, I'd say. These days, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, even Threads. Let's get out there. And what I love to do is be in conversation with people. So if you see me on one of these platforms, please write a comment. And I just love to learn from people.
That's terrific. Now, before I forget, did you happen to bring tea with you today?
I did. So
wonderful.
This is a mug made by my mother-in-law, who is a potter. And we are so lucky to have so many beautiful pieces by Marcia Halprin. She's based up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's my cup of tea.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's like a light blue color and just so beautifully made. I just love it. And Cambridge, Massachusetts is one town over from me. So I'll have to stop by and say hello and get myself a mug. Well, thank you so much, Susannah, for joining us today. We really appreciate learning from you.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you folks for joining us too. Check out the HITea with Grace website for more great guests like Susannah today. Cheers.
Like a Girl Media is more than a media network. It's a community. We want to meet you and amplify your voice and the voices of outstanding women innovating in healthcare. Interested in starting your own podcast or hosting an event near you? Connect with us online or in person. We're here to support and empower you.